All right, this is the Story Series podcast where we tell the stories behind the people. Marisa Balkus, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Brandon.
I'm so thrilled that you're here. And so, just for those who don't know, I'm going to just read a little brief introduction as to who you are. So, you are a veteran producer and executive with deep experience in anime, adult animation, and IP adaptations.
Mm-hmm.
Your passion for anime brought you to Crunchyroll and later Netflix, where you oversaw titles like Arcane, League of Legends, Devil May Cry, Tomb Raider, and most recently you launched Culture Misfit, a consulting firm for animated film and television.
I did.
So once again, welcome.
Thank you.
So I want to get to all that, but just as a way to get to know you, I like to start with origin stories.
Okay.
So if you could, where did you grow up?
I grew up in New Hampshire, in a city called Nashua, which at the time was probably a population of like 60,000 people. So roughly the size of Burbank, and right on the border between Massachusetts and New Hampshire.
You did. And were you an especially creative child? What were your hobbies out there? What were you exposed to as a kid?
Oh my gosh. I definitely loved drawing and illustrating when I was a kid, partially because I grew up on anime. So I just loved that hobby and art form. Very much into New England sports. Sports is obviously a huge subculture if you grow up in any of those states. So I was a huge Red Sox and Celtics and Patriots fan, and that took up a lot of my time and my day-to-day. And also I loved to write. I would always write short stories when I was a kid. So I'd like to say I was like semi-creative.
Yeah, it was a good mix of creative and also of athleticism. And did you participate in sports?
Not really, no.
Not really.
I mean, I played recreational soccer, but I got injured in high school. And after that, I was like, okay, the sport life is not for me. I can be a fan, but not necessarily an athlete.
Yeah. And when you were in high school, did you have any idea what you wanted to do after?
I didn't. I think for me, my loves at the time were, again, sports, anime, and gaming. And I didn't know that there was a career path in anime and gaming and animation and entertainment because they don't really teach you that at a public high school in New Hampshire. So I had kind of resigned myself to thinking, well, I love writing, I love sports. Maybe I could become a sports journalist. Like my dream was to be Jackie McMullen, who was a very, very lauded sports beat journalist for the Boston Celtics. So I was kind of leaning towards that in high school, but I had no flipping idea.
Now, just going back for a second, what was your diet of anime? What were you kind of consuming as you were growing up? Any favorites?
Well, I was a child of the Toonami generation. So when I was younger, it was definitely Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Yeah.
Changed my life, was a
Yes.
formative show for me. Cowboy Bebop, obviously.
Same.
Tenchi Muyo,
Yep.
Escaflowne, basically anything that Cartoon Network and Adult Swim were licensing in the US was my gateway drug into anime in the late 90s.
Yeah, I have to say same.
Yeah.
That, you know, the Cowboy Bebop generation. And so, okay, so you're now approaching the end of your high school period. Where are you going next? What are your plans?
I mean, go to university, and for me, I wanted to stay relatively close to home. So I looked to schools in Boston. And I was looking, again, mostly at journalism because I had this dream of intersecting my love of, NBA basketball and sports and writing, and had this big grand dream of being, a Celtics reporter. But that quickly changed as soon as I got into college.
And why did it change?
It was interesting. So I wound up going to Boston University and entering the School of Communications there. And when you enter, you have this introductory kind of what they call Com 101 class, where you get exposed to all of the majors they offer, whether it's film, TV, PR, communications, journalism, what have you. So during the journalism portion of that course, there was one moment where if you wanted to study this, you had to knock on the door of a total stranger in their residential home of somebody whose loved one was recently deceased and write an obituary for that person and do some kind of investigative reporting into that person's life. And at the time I thought, okay, I see why this is necessary to be a journalist. You kind of have to reach out to people that you don't know and ask really hard hitting questions. But this is not for me. Like, this is not the assignment for me. So I kind of learned, okay, I might teeter away from this. And during that same course, I got really into the film and television side of it. And I thought, well, I also love those things. I love film, I love TV, I love animation, I love narrative storytelling. Maybe this should be my major instead, and we'll see what happens.
So I had never heard of that test.
Yeah.
That journalistic test that your university gave you, but it's a pretty powerful one, and it's an important one.
Yeah.
Because you know up front whether or not this kind of thing that presumably you'll be doing regularly is for you or not.
Yeah.
Huh. And why did you feel that wasn't for you?
I think I tend not to want to be intrusive, and I think it is the obligation of good journalists to be intrusive in a positive way, right? To needle at people and get answers to questions, despite what the person they're chatting to might think of them or might want to answer. I just can't ruffle feathers that way. I'm too much of a people pleaser.
Right, but that's what college is for.
Yeah.
You're finding it, and you're saying no to things so you can say yes to others, and so then you start to graduate towards the film and television side of the comms major.
Yes.
And you start to feel like, okay, this is maybe a little bit closer to you.
Yeah. Well, and then I discovered screenwriting as an art form, and I was like, oh, yeah, movies and TV shows are written by people. And it's a really wonderful format that you can explore and play with. So I dove deep into the screenwriting thing, screenwriting art form, I should say, when I was in college.
And how did you find that?
I loved it. I wanted to write the next great female Indiana Jones franchise, like, big budget actioner type movies. And it was great. It was such a good way to work my creative muscle and just establish these limitless worlds and wonderful characters. And it was a blast building that little screenwriting bundle when I was in my 20s.
Yeah, absolutely. And you presumably getting closer to graduating, are you starting to think about post-college life at all?
Yeah, I am. So the great news about Boston University is they offered a internship program called BU in LA, where either before you graduate or just after, you're housed in Los Angeles with a bunch of other BU students, and they set you up with a couple internships in the industry. So knowing that I wanted my career to presumably be in screenwriting, if I could make it, I decided to sign up for the BU NLA internship program and move out here in the spring of 2012.
Spring of 2012.
Yeah.
And what was your internship?
I interned at two places. I interned at the Gersh Agency, which is
Huge.
Obviously a well-known, talent agency within the industry, in their motion picture lit department. So it was, doing a lot of intern things at the time, like doing runs and, covering phones and everything. But it was a lot of coverage too. So I could kind of get a pulse at the time of what, feature scripts were being floated around town.
You mean like writing coverage?
Writing coverage, yes.
Okay. And for those who don't know, writing coverage is?
Writing coverage is basically evaluating a script, its marketplace potential, its strength, and also summarizing the plot of the script as well.
It's really good practice.
It's great practice, and it's very important when you're dealing with either executives or producers or talent who might not have time to read all of the scripts that show up on their desk. Coverage is a way of basically being the first line of defense to filter through all of those scripts and then only escalate which ones are absolutely worth reading to the people that you work for.
Which are very few.
It's
typically.
very few, yeah.
But it's also a great experience because as someone who, was just a college student and you're reading your friend's work, presumably, but you get to LA and then you get to an agency and you see the scripts that get to them.
Yes.
And you get to see what else is out there, which is, most of it, like anything, is not going to rise to the top, but there are some that do. And so just to get a sense of, what kind of scripts are being sent out there in the world, it's a great great learning experience.
Yeah, what I liked about it too is you get a sense of what works in reading a good script, but even more productive, you get a sense of what doesn't work in reading scripts that might not be as good or might need some improvement. So, as an aspiring writer, to get that exposure to things that do work and things that don't is totally invaluable.
Absolutely. And where was the second internship?
The second internship was at Castle Rock Entertainment.
Oh, another
Yeah.
huge. Is that Rob Reiner?
It is Rob Reiner. Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. So,
It's a good program that the BU had.
yeah, that's a great program. I highly recommend it. Yeah, so I got to intern for Rob Reiner. How crazy is that? The director of The Princess Bride and A Few Good Men and so many great movies. And he would show up in the office and
gosh.
you know, it would again be a lot of coverage and support for the teams there and putting together casting lists for things.
You starting to feel like, because this is an internship, both of these, and they have end dates, and you're probably going to go back to Boston at some point. Do you feel like, okay, LA is where I want to be?
Yeah, my goal was to not go back to Boston.
Not go back.
My goal was to get a job in the industry before graduation, so I did not have to go and attend my own graduation.
Nice.
Because those ceremonies are a slog.
Right.
And I did it, by the way. I never attended my own college graduation
Good for
because
you.
I was employed before I graduated.
And what was the job, and how did you find it?
So my first job in the industry was as a receptionist at New Regency Productions. And again, I found it through a fellow alumni in the BU in LA program, who happened to be the head of operations at New Regency. We were just at a networking event, and I was asking some very pointed questions about what I should do next. Specifically, I asked her, hey, I interned at this agency. Gersh actually wanted to hire me to like a mailroom gig or something. I forget. One of their low-level, entry-level gigs at the time. But I didn't want to be an agent. I saw the way that, you know, that kind of workplace environment was, and I respect and deeply, you know, appreciate what agents do, but it wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. That more business side of this industry didn't kind of wet my whistle in the same way the more creative side did.
And sometimes you have to say no, right?
Yeah, I did say no. But I asked her, I said, is this a dumb thing that I'm doing by saying no to an agency offering me a job right before graduation? And she said, no, it's actually a smart thing because you're chasing what you actually want to do. You might not know what it is yet, but it's good to say no to the things that you know you don't want to do.
It's worth highlighting because so often in this industry, we're chasing the yes and we want a yes so badly.
Yeah.
But sometimes, you know, not all yeses are equal. And if it's yes to something that's a little off the path, it might not serve you in the long run. And so you had that kind of that foresight, that wisdom to say, I'm not so sure.
Yeah. And I think that the critical thing to saying no to that was that I did try it first. I had the internship exposure and I realized this is not the path for me. I think that if you do say yes to something and you realize a few months into it, it's not working out, it's okay to go in a different direction. You don't have to feel trapped in the corner of, well, I said yes to this and I should feel just grateful to be here, knowing how difficult it is to break into this industry. I would encourage people to keep that job, but also look for something that might be more aligned with their passion or their path.
Right. And for you, that was New Regency.
Yeah. So the woman I had spoken to essentially was like, so there's a different path you could take. We're looking for a receptionist right now, and it's at a production company. So you'll be more kind of hands-on with the creative side of the industry and of greeting people at the door, but working for a place that packages, develops, produces, does post-production, and releases feature films into the world. And I said, yeah, this seems like a good foot in the door. I could do this.
It's a big production company. New Regency is really well known.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. And so you were hired as the receptionist there, didn't go back to your own graduation because you were here in LA and you were here to stay.
I was here to stay.
And how did you find that job?
I loved it.
Yeah.
I wound up spending 5 years there, crawling up the ladder from receptionist to assistant on 3 desks to coordinator to creative executive. So I had a kind of very rare linear climb within one company to executive over the course of my time at New Regency. and it was a wonderful run. We were on a tear when it came to Oscar nominations and wins. During the time that I was there, the company released 12 Years a Slave, which won Best Picture, Birdman, which won Best Picture the year after, Gone Girl, which obviously got a lot of accolades, and then The Revenant, which led to Leonardo DiCaprio's first Best Actor win at the Oscars. And that was a movie that I was lucky enough to work on. So it was just a great time of working on mid-budget to high-budget original director-driven films at a time when that corner of the industry was shrinking rapidly and more of these IP-driven blockbusters were starting to cannibalize the space. So it was definitely a privilege to have had that exposure at that time.
Absolutely. There's so often people go to production companies where nothing happens.
Yeah.
And you were lucky enough to have this amazing run of involvement with these films that are still, today are talked about.
Yeah. I got to work on like 12 different movies that actually came out during the time that I was there, which is pretty wild to say.
Yeah. And you said that you were there for 5 years. So when did this change occur where you decided to go somewhere else, or how did that happen?
Yeah. So what happened at the time was a new regime came in and a new president of production came in to run the company. And typically when that happens, high level executives want to bring in their own people, their own executives to work underneath them. And I had been actually the last executive standing from the old roster. I was this one little point of continuity as a 27-year-old executive who was the connective tissue between the old regime and the incoming one. So I hung out for a little bit, and then my boss at the time was kind enough to say, hey, I'm bringing in my own people. We'll give you a few months to kind of wrap things up here before you go your own way. And that was okay for me because at the time, streaming was really starting to boom in a way that was unexpected. Theatrical feature film was kind of on its way out. And there were also rumors that Disney was coming in to buy out 20th Century Fox, which is where New Regency had its put distribution deal. We existed on the Fox lot in Building 12. So I was kind of like looking to greener pastures anyway. And ironically, because I was so vocal about my love of anime and of gaming during the time I worked at New Regency, I kind of garnered a reputation for being that person. And because I was that person, I got connected to Crunchyroll, which was looking to launch their own originals initiative at the time. And they're like, you work in entertainment and you like this stuff. Come join us. And I said, what? I can work in anime? Are you kidding me? So it was like the biggest no-brainer of all time to go and join Crunchyroll.
That's fantastic. And just curious, how did you vocalize those interests of yours at New Regency?
It was in the IP that I would be chasing, honestly, as a little baby executive, whenever we look for books to option or comics to option or potential properties that we could turn into franchises, my tastes would always veer in that direction. And then I also took a lot of pride in the gaming adaptations that we either produced or were in development on at New Regency, one of which was the Assassin's Creed feature film. We also had a few other productions with Ubisoft at the time that were in development, but ultimately never made.
But you were responsible for those?
I was on those projects. So I was just in that pocket anyway. And obviously in 2017, like in terms of the executives in the business who were super passionate about anime and manga and gaming, it was kind of few and far between.
Yes.
We hadn't had really this worldwide anime boom yet. So it was like I was the different one,
Yeah.
like she's got this weird taste.
A misfit.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's great. And so, yeah, when Crunchyroll came calling, I mean, that seems like a perfect, you have this great experience at New Regency, and then now you can combine it with this love that you hadn't really been able to foster until going to Crunchyroll. And so you interviewed, you got it.
I did.
And you were, at that time, were they just setting up the office here LA and Burbank, or how far along were they in terms of just their presence here?
It was before we even had an office.
Before.
In LA. Yeah.
So did they what is the origin of that company? Were they based in Japan or?
No, they were based in San Francisco. They are an American startup. I believe they actually ironically started as a piracy site, pirating Naruto to bring
sounds like
to
anime
bring to
fans.
the US. And then they're like, oh man, if we officially license this in some way and turn this into a real thing, this could take off. So I joined when they were still just based out of San Francisco, and it was before they had been bought out by any major Hollywood entity. They were owned by a company called Otter Media at the time. And then during the 4 years I was there, they were then sold to Warner Media, which it was called at the time, and then Sony. So it kind of snowballed into a much, much, much bigger company over the 4 years that I spent there.
Right. And at the time that you joined, they were just a licensing company with aspirations to create their own content, or?
Yeah, it was basically a licensing company that had a streaming service that brought simulcast anime to a global audience outside of Japan. But back in the day, the name of the game was having owned original content. So I was in charge, along with a few other colleagues, of helping to build out that slate and division.
Which sounds like a dream job.
It was challenging, but it was a dream job. It was super cool.
Yes. And so you get there, and then how do you go about connecting with creators? How are you trying to fill that slate?
Well, it's a twofold thing. So first off, we had to figure out how the heck are we going to actually produce these shows. At the time, and still to this day, Japanese studios are just very, very booked up. And they're very hesitant to have Western players come in and say, hey, make our content, because their local industry is already so busy making shows for their own linear channels within the country.
So you mean Japanese animation studios are so booked up?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
That's why a lot of studios, I'm trying to like when I was at Hasbro, there were several studios in Korea.
Yeah.
South Korea, for example. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Because of that, we're like, okay, we need to open up our own studios then. So we quietly opened up an animation studio in Japan, in Tokyo, and then an animation studio in Burbank. So we now have 2 pipeline routes to be able to produce projects through. Then it was a matter of getting the projects, and that involved scouting for IP that made sense for the platform at the time, and also linking up with talent, both in the director pool, supervising director pool, and writer, showrunner pool, who could authentically understand anime and help bring this mandate to life.
Yeah, I remember early on the shows High Guardian Spice was one, and then Onyx Equinox.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Onyx Equinox is Sophia Alexander, right?
It is, yes.
So when I was at Hasbro, Sophia was there. She was, I believe, just getting started as like a storyboard artist.
Yeah.
On the show. And you know, Hasbro later moved into the same complex as Crunchyroll.
Yes.
In Burbank.
Yes.
And that was really cool to see her just go from that to, you know, creator showrunner. So talk to me about just those initial meetings of the show.
So her manager at the time put her on my radar and said, this is somebody that you should meet. Right now, she's just a storyboard artist, but she has this wonderful, wonderful idea for a Mesoamerican anime series. And I thought, well, that's super cool. That combines a bunch of things that I love, which are, you know, hero's journey type of stories that invert a little bit, and also world mythologies that we have not necessarily explored too deeply in Western entertainment. So I had a general with her. During the general, she showed me her pitch deck for Onyx Equinox, and I thought, oh man, there's a show here. I think we have to make this. So I went to my bosses. I lobbied for the show. I said, let's at least develop it, see what we can get out of it. And we wound up greenlighting it and making it into one of our original series over many, many years.
What was it about the pitch deck? What did you see in the ingredients of her pitch that caused it to stand out for you?
For me, I saw a really, really timely theme, which unfortunately still applies to our day to day, which is centering on a protagonist and a series of supportive characters who desperately want to change the world, but ultimately have inherited a world where violence is rampant and they feel powerless to change because there is an upper class of people, in the case of Onyx Equinox, the gods, who don't care about what's going on below. So how do you navigate that when you're a young person thrown into a world of chaos? You're just grasping for some sort of positive change, and suddenly the onus is thrust on you individually to feel like you need to change the world and bring peace to the world. It was that theme that really resonated with me. And then her art in the pitch deck was just incredible. She had such a vision for the show. She also had a short animatic of one scene that she wanted to include in the show that was just incredible. So it was really the whole package of great theme, wonderful characters, clear, beginning to end story for season 1, and an animatic to boot.
I imagine you probably heard a ton of pitches at the time. What were some commonalities in the pitches that you found didn't quite have it, or were lacking in what you thought they needed to move forward into development?
A lot of people have a really great gateway concept into their story, and they have a wonderful world, but they don't have anything to back that up necessarily. So for me, you can have a great hook, but unless you know where it's going and how it pays off after season 1, and then how it lends itself to a series concept that sustains itself into a potential season 2 or season 3, it doesn't feel like a fully formed idea. So for me, yeah, leading with a hook and world building is not enough. You need more of a clear idea of where your story is going. You need to make sure that the themes behind it are, really gritty enough to sustain great story, great character. And you just need to have conviction about your idea as well. I think the worst thing that I can hear in a pitch is when you ask a showrunner or a writer or a creator a question about their story or their show, and they say, yeah, I don't really have an answer to that. Or, yeah, I'm not super wedded to that. We could change that. It's like, no, I want you to fight for your idea. I want you to fight for what you believe in. I want you to have the answers, because that shows me that you care and you have a vision. You need that vision.
That's very true, is that there's a reason that you want to tell the story, and don't just give it all away in the first couple questions and say, well, it's whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like, no.
No. Then what is it?
Yeah.
Then what is it? I think that you can still be flexible enough as a creator to mold your idea towards whatever seller that you're pitching to, but you can't be so flexible that you lose sight of what your idea is to begin with. So I'm always encouraging any creative throughout the entire process, whether it's pitching, whether it's development, whether it's production, please push back. Feel empowered to push back and defend your idea. And it's an executive's job to try to do as best they can to see your vision and then compromise with you on what is best for your vision in general as you try to put it out on whatever platform is distributing and financing your idea.
Yeah, no, that's a great subject, because I was curious, what was your role during development? What's the typical role for an executive once the show moves forward into development?
Oh my gosh, it encompasses a lot. So first off, you need to make sure that your showrunner or creator is supported by the right staff around them. And that can mean supervising director, that can mean directors beneath them, that means a writing staff as well. And depending on the experience level of the creator you're working with, as an executive, you might have to be the person to really go out into the ecosystem and find those writers, which means sending out a packet that's kind of a high-level overview of the project, and then reading samples of all of the writers and director talent coming in, evaluating which of those hundreds of submissions of people that you're reading are the best sensibility match for the show, then setting up meetings between that talent and the creator, then having the creator ultimately choose who they'd like to go with. And then from there on out, it comes into mapping the actual show itself, which can mean series Bible, it can mean series outline, treatment, initial scripts, visual development, early visual explorations like backgrounds, character designs, environments. It's a whole big old process of basically expanding your world in an instant.
Yeah. And what was the length of development for that show?
It was quick. We greenlight it. We greenlit it really fast. So honestly, oh my God, it was so long ago. I'm trying to remember. It was a mere matter of months.
That's
So we
crazy.
were honestly overlapping a lot of the development with the waterfall schedule of actual production of that show.
And that's not uncommon. Well, I should say typical development can sometimes be like 2 years.
It can be.
It can be.
Yeah.
But for a show that's a couple months, I mean, that's awesome because as a creator, you want your show to move into production because that's when it's really getting made and
Yeah.
things can stall so much in development. But a few months is like, okay, like buckle up, here we go.
No, you're building the train tracks as the train's running.
Right, right. And what were some of those the learning curves for you personally? Was that the first show at Crunchyroll that you developed that made it to Greenlight?
Yes.
So, okay, so you're
Yes.
on this ride too, like kind
Yes.
of in some ways for the first time because you had mostly movie experience
Yes,
before this,
which moves at a glacial pace compared to TV.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So how are you just day to day learning and growing personally?
That's a really great question. It was a lot of balancing of priorities. It was also a lot of balancing of personalities. It was learning where it's beneficial to insert yourself as an executive and where it's beneficial to remove yourself and just let the creative process flow. Let the creators do their thing. Learning not to meddle is a really important thing when you're an executive. You're not the creator of the show. You know, if you're lucky, you might be a producer of it, but you need to be more of a facilitator than some sort of creative contributor necessarily. So it was a lot of, for me, learning that balance at the time. And it was also making sure that the sensibilities of the show were protected. Onyx Equinox was a very mature adult animated series, and it was deeply inspired by a lot of shonen and seinen anime. It was very violent. The style of boarding and layout in that show is not necessarily what you would expect out of a Western animation. So we had staffed a lot of Western animation personalities that weren't necessarily kind of getting it, especially in the board space. So it was a matter of pushing them to really understand we're borrowing from anime. We're paying homage to these specific anime comps. Please try to get your style of boarding up to this sensibility because we're not making something that you would see coming out of Warner Brothers necessarily.
Right. And so, and there's probably not a ton at the time storyboard artists who have experience boarding anime style.
Well,
right?
there were a ton of board artists who had the sensibilities, but they didn't have the experience because they were much younger. They were more like just coming off of being revisionists in the business, and you have this tension between other people on the team wanting to hire veterans, which is so important. You need that veteran presence on a series because if you just have a bunch of young guns, you know, trying to make something that can involve some headaches. But at the same time, you need to make sure that those veterans are extremely sensibility driven and can accomplish the type of thing that you're trying to do. And we had a mix of a bunch of people who could do that. We had some who couldn't. And those were some tough calls to make.
Yeah. It's like, you know, having been a head writer across a couple different shows, it's the same is true for a writing staff.
Yeah.
You can't have all new writers because then you'll spending most of your time rewriting.
Yes.
And so you need to try to balance between some experience and also, you know, try to, you know, there's this desire to bring people up too and give people their shot.
Correct.
So it's like, okay, some new people, but some experience. And you know, those are always tough calls to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you need that mixture of management skills and leadership, but also sensibility.
Right. This is probably a totally unfair question, but when you're talking about paying homage to anime and the style, what do you think that style is? How would you define anime?
Oh my God. It's just animation. It's just Japanese animation, which contains multitudes of different genres and cinematic styles and types of storytelling. I think for that show in particular, it was leaning into some of the more hardcore shonen, borderline seinen anime of the time.
When you say shonen, that's like boy.
Yeah, younger boys
Younger boy.
cartoons.
What's seinen?
Seinen is older, cartoons aimed at older men.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
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 And
So like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure,
Okay.
like could skirt both of those lines. Attack
Yeah.
on Titan could skirt both of those lines.
Yeah.
Berserk is seinen.
Right.
Yes.
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 Very violent, very graphic.
Yeah.
Okay. So those were your comps. I was curious.
A few of them. Yeah.
Some of your comps for that
Yeah.
particular show. And as an executive at Crunchyroll during this time, what are your other responsibilities? Because you overseeing this show, but are you also have other things in development? Are you taking pitches? What is your other day-to-day look like?
It's overseeing that show. It's also
Yeah.
overseeing a bunch of other shows.
Yeah.
It's taking pitches. It's constantly reading and imbibing new material, potential IP for adaptations. It's taking general meetings with talent in the industry who are interested in the anime space or have a passion for it.
I think I was
And
one of those people.
You
That's
were
where
one
we
of those
met.
people.
That's where we met.
Yeah.
I forget how, maybe it was at a Comic-Con or something. I'm not sure where I like got your card. It might've been at a Comic-Con.
Possibly.
And then, yeah, that's where I had a, because I was working at Stretch Armstrong across the plaza.
Maybe did
Or no.
Sophia introduce us?
Maybe actually, I think I was on Tots at Disney Junior by the
Okay.
time we met.
Okay.
So what are some moments at Crunchyroll you look back on that you're particularly proud of?
Definitely Onyx Equinox is a big one for me. That was kind of my full baby that I loved and saw throughout the entirety of its, birth to death process. It was also just navigating leaders who had differing opinions on how to run the department and making sure that I could try not to solve problems above my pay grade, which are things that you can be very tempted to do when you're an executive. You see people around you making decisions that you might not agree with or might be detrimental for the business or that might not have the same level of vision or planning that you would like out of something, which is normal, especially in the streaming world where things move very, very fast and you have different leaders with different corporate mandates who come in and out and things change on a dime. So it was learning to try to not preoccupy myself with those things that I can't control and just focus on the work. That didn't happen overnight, but that was a big journey that I had there that I'm proud of.
You had mentioned leaving Crunchyroll.
Yes.
When you're getting to that point, how do you start to think about your exit, or do you think about it?
I hadn't been thinking about my exit until the right opportunity showed up. And in this case, Netflix was looking to hire an executive on what at the time was their anime team. And I thought, oh, damn, they're doing what I do right now, but at a massive scale. This is the company that has outbid me on a lot of pitches that I've wanted to buy, like Splinter Cell and Captain Laserhawk and, any show that we showed, we wanted to get at Crunchyroll, they'd come in just overpay for, and we're like, they took it away again. So it was one of those, well, if you can't beat them, you should join them type of moments. So I saw the opportunity and I went for it.
And how did you find that when you first started?
I loved it. It's so funny. They talk a really big game about the learning curve of joining a company like that. And it is intense. It's the volume of work that you have to do there is bananas. But I think Crunchyroll, having been a streaming service that had a lot of other cross-functional verticals that I would interact with, like business affairs, like post-production, like production, like e-commerce and merchandise and events and everything. Crunchyroll's streaming culture really positioned me to succeed very quickly within Netflix's streaming culture. So I took to it like a fish to water. I loved it.
Yeah. And what were you tasked with?
I initially was tasked with basically inheriting half of the slate of shows that the anime and then what eventually became the adult animation genre team was, developing and producing at the time. So shows like Dragon Age Absolution, shows like Tomb Raider, The Legend of Lara Croft, Devil May Cry, a ton of shows that I can't talk about because they haven't aired yet. But yeah, I was basically inheriting a slate. Captain Laserhawk, by the way, was one of those shows that I inherited. And I was like, hey, I remember you, buddy. I remember when Adi Shankar pitched this to me back in the day. So when I was at Crunchyroll. So it was funny. It was kind of like like saying hello to a bunch of creatives that I had already known and worked with intimately in a different capacity, and then joining their actual shows.
Yeah. And just to paint a picture a little bit, when you say that you're handed this slate,
Yes.
so what is that actually? What are you supposed to do as an executive there? Like, does that mean a number of different shows are at all different places in development, and it's now time to kind of try to, as best you can, see them through to a hopeful green light? Like, what does that look like?
It's both development and production. So I inherited shows that were in development that you need to mold with creatives to an eventual green light. And I was also inheriting shows that were in active production where we were getting back very, very early animatics on a few episodes. And I would be in charge of giving notes on those animatics and then on the animation, on things like the voice acting, on music, everything that involves the production side of things. So it was both a development and production type of schedule. And again, oftentimes, especially during the time I was there wasn't really a huge development phase for projects. So many times we were writing the scripts as a waterfall schedule was going.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
How did you find that? Would you recommend that? Pros and cons?
I like it because if you have a green light under your belt, 9 times out of 10, the thing's actually getting made and it's going to launch and it's going to be incredible. I do think it's important to spend that time in development, though, really, really outlining a season 1 story in a detailed way and having episodic synopses really fleshed out so you know where you're going as you write the scripts. Because if you're writing your scripts against a production waterfall schedule and you get hung up on a story thing in one episode, the entire schedule can come to a halt. And that means money, that means time, that means delays. So I like the acceleration of it, but I do wish that, on a few shows, we spent a little bit more time in development, really sorting things out.
How about any moments there that you're particularly proud of?
I'm definitely proud of, I'm proud of all of it. I loved the time that I had there. I think it's a privilege to be able to get the keys to the kingdom and be able to say, hey, I'm at a company that has a lot of ambition and has a lot of money to spend. Can I go get this piece of IP and turn it into a series? And you actually get a yes. That doesn't happen at a lot of places, but it happens there. But obviously, I'm incredibly proud of Devil May Cry. That show was definitely one of my babies, and I got to oversee season 1 and season 2 of that. And now it's launched to the world to, I think, what seems to be a pretty decent degree of success. So I'm very proud of that. And there were a few other moments that I can't talk about because they involve IP that there hasn't been any public discussion about yet. But I got to have some really, really cool meetings on some dream pieces of IP to potentially adapt into animated series.
That's really interesting. Just thinking back to your time at New Regency and this hobby interest of anime and how really at Crunchyroll, your time at Crunchyroll and Netflix, the whole culture really changed.
It blew up. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It totally did. It suddenly became a household form of entertainment. It became a multi-generational form of entertainment. And I think what accelerated a lot of both the viewing habits of anime and also the production of anime-inspired shows and animation, ironically, was the pandemic. Because when the rest of the town, meaning Hollywood, shut down because of COVID protocol, animation was very easily able to go remote and to succeed, and people were watching it. You could still make it from home. So there was definitely a bubble, I think, that took off during that time period and exploded animation and adult animation and anime into the world.
That's a great point because I was on, I think, the 3rd season of TOTS or something at the time of the pandemic where everyone suddenly went remote.
Yeah.
And animation was largely uninterrupted.
Yeah.
At least on, at least in the LA side of things where we could just go home and continue writing on our laptops.
Yeah.
Whereas we didn't have to meet on set or do anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And where were you at? Were you at Netflix at the time during the pandemic,
It
or
was I overlapped between both Crunchyroll and Netflix.
overlapped?
Yeah.
And so, were the amount of green lights that you could issue, or or the yeses, like just kind of spiked during that time?
I think it was, yeah, the yeses definitely were there. And it was also because there was a lot of talent that normally wouldn't play in that space who suddenly realized they could make a paycheck in animation and wanted to come into this space. So, which is not a bad thing. I actually think animation is a medium that anybody should play in, even if they come from live action. I don't think that there's something as a live action interloper taking people's jobs within animation. I think we need to widen the pot to include everybody because that's how more work gets created and how more jobs exist. But yeah, at the time there was some fancy schmancy talent who didn't have work in live action who were like, "Oh yeah, I could change this spec into an animated epic and suddenly make it." And then you talk through the idea with them, and they kind of fall in love with the limitlessness of what animation can provide as a medium.
Right. Now, going back to just the boom of animation, especially anime in the culture, what do you think makes it so resonant?
It's a really good question. I think anime resonates for two distinct reasons. One is there is a degree of sincerity in the journeys and the emotions that are expressed by the characters in anime that for a second I think we turned away from within Western storytelling. I really think that superhero storytelling in the United States, it either became too grimdark, or it undercut genuine emotion with a quip, in a way where characters couldn't truly express their feelings unless they made a joke about it. Whereas anime wears its sincerity and its emotion on its sleeve, regardless of who the demographic is or what the genre is. There's just more of an outlet there that I think that viewers relate to. I also feel like, especially during the pandemic, when people are isolated, when you have multiple generations who are largely connecting online, through the internet, forming parasocial relationships with influencers and TikTokers and everything. It was just a time where a lot of people needed a friend. And I think anime series, the way that they're engineered to be so long running and have, in some cases, some really great ensemble characters, offer a world where you can see yourself as friends with these characters and these people. You're spending a lot of time with them. And when you have nothing else to do because you're trapped inside your home, you want to spend time with characters that you love, that are flawed, that you're rooting for, that offer a basis of friendship. And I don't know, anime just lent itself to that really, really well, I think, in a way that Western storytelling wasn't.
Any treks out to anime conventions during your time at Crunchyroll or Netflix?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Which ones?
Anime Expo, obviously.
Yes.
Crunchyroll Expo. Anime Los Angeles, which is
ALA.
LA is a party.
Yeah.
The jankier the conventions are, the more you party there.
Right.
But yeah, all of them.
How
all
funny.
of them.
I remember, yeah, I back in high school actually middle school and then high school is when I joined the anime club and was my first time out to Anime Expo in Anaheim at the time. And your observation on people kind of needing a friend or making friends through anime, and that's what I got out of these conventions was, everybody who's gathering together and just the cosplaying and that closeness that you feel to these characters. It just made me think of anime conventions and those my time there. I mean, probably went to, a dozen over the years.
Yeah. I mean, there's a community there. There's a community that engages around the actual storytelling itself. And I think that deep level of engagement is what's made it endure and also explode.
Now, what about, do you feel like there's common misconceptions in Hollywood about anime or that genre of animation?
I think so. Yeah. I think that there are still some generations within our industry that view anime as pornography or something weird, which is really unfortunate. Or there's people who just associate anime with shonen anime and whatever's coming out of Shonen Jump.
Right.
And nothing else.
Which is boy leaning.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, which is really unfortunate because obviously there's every medium under the sun that anime offers. Yeah, I think that those are the biggest misconceptions, or that anything that pertains to what women want to watch or consume has to involve magical girls in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a cliche, right?
It is a cliche. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
When you were getting to that point at Netflix where you felt like it was either time to leave, or what was your exit like there?
It was it was pretty brutal. It was not by choice, as what happens with a lot of people that work there. But you know, I think it was time. It was ultimately time for me at that point in my life. It's a really, really, really invigorating place to work, and that also can take a lot out of you emotionally. So I was just in need of a break for a little bit, to be honest. It's when you throw yourself into your passion, sometimes you can get consumed by it, and I needed
100%.
to remove myself from that and find who I was again.
Yeah, because it's just the grind, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I mean, the same is very similar to a writer in that you just get tunnel vision.
Yeah.
And you can easily always work and never not work.
Yes.
You know, even when you are not at your desk or you're not at work, but you're always, if you're not careful, thinking about it. It's on the back of your mind, or stuff that you're doing. Just, you know, it's like your work, your hobby, all that is just this, like, you know, amorphous like thing that kind of runs your life.
It's true. And it's really, really, really difficult to be able to parcel all of that out when you do what you love. When you're a fan of what you do for a career, like you're tied up in knots.
You are, because your hobby is the thing that you do for work. And then it's just like, but sometimes you need to step away and just like, yeah. And you were feeling that.
Yeah.
So
passion is a double-edged sword. Yeah, absolutely.
That is very true. That is true, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're fortunate to be doing the work that you're doing, but it's also just, it's not, you don't show up every day to an anime convention.
Correct.
And have fun.
Yeah.
It's not that.
Yeah.
It is hard work. Yeah, that's a great point. And so what did you end up learning about yourself when you stepped away, made that decision?
I think that I learned that I'm not my career, that there are people in this business who care deeply about me as a person beyond whatever corporate hat I'm wearing at the time. There are some who only care about that part. There are some who, after I left Netflix, were just like, okay, you're of no, use to us anymore. See you later. But there are a lot of great humans in this business who do wind up caring about you as a person, and the bonds that you form with those peers are really invaluable. So for me, it was learning to see who I was outside of work via people who saw me for who I was when I left work. And I think that was really reassuring for me.
How did you spend your time? Did you travel? Did you try new things? Were you thinking about your next move?
I did a lot of traveling. I did a lot of traveling initially. I went to New Zealand, which was totally awesome. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan.
I was gonna say,
so
I was like, I'm gonna ask. Is it because
I do have an Elvish tattoo. So yes.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, but I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I had been wanting to go there for quite some time. And I have some friends who live on the South Island. They moved there, I want to say 2019, 2020, possibly earlier. But it was a great opportunity to explore New Zealand, have some real outdoor healing, because so much of that country has wonderful outdoor activities you can do, and also spend time with friends. So I loved that. I wound up hiking something called the Camino de Santiago in Spain with my dad, which is a pilgrimage route that goes from the border of France and Spain all the way to the western border of coastal Spain. And that was an adventure. Lots of hiking with your backpack on 20 miles a day, staying overnight in random places for weeks on end.
Wow.
And that was wonderful.
Really disconnected.
I
like
did.
unplugged and just
I did. Well, I was, the way that I looked at it is when I was let go, I assessed the landscape at the time for full-time executive work. And the reality is there were no jobs. The industry as a whole, I think for the last year has been very constricted, and work is really scarce for everybody, for writers, for creators, for directors, for execs too. So I thought, okay, you can either punish yourself for this time and just wallow and try to get jobs and feel bad every time it doesn't work out, or you can treat this time as being the most time off you'll have probably before retirement or until you retire, and seize the day and take advantage of it. So,
I think that that's great. Did you ever feel like you took a break before that?
no.
Like
Oh, God,
Crunchyroll,
no.
New Regency, Netflix. You ever take time off? Not
No,
really, right?
God, I mean, even when I would take vacations, they would be to places like Japan and Korea or Europe, and I would inevitably wind up going to one of the international offices or doing some work related meetings while I was in those countries on vacation, because I felt like, well, I'm here, so I should be seeing these people.
Right. Maximize it, right?
Yes, yes,
And you're kind of always on.
yes, exactly, exactly.
And I like that, because it's now you were no longer at Netflix, and it's like, well, how do I make this really work for me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you have any inkling of what you would be doing next? When did those kinds of thoughts start to like work their way back into?
Yeah, for me, I wanted to continue doing what I love and what I'm passionate about, which is working in this adult animation, anime inspired space. And that the reason being is I still firmly believe that we are just on the precipice of this segment of our lovely animated medium still booming. It hasn't happened yet. We've had some successes that have hit within that adult animated space, but we're still very much at the beginning of the journey. And when you look at an audience that is now multi-generational of millennials, Gen X, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, who have been raised on animation, be it Walt Disney movies or anime or gaming, which is a form of animation, all of those audiences are not abandoning any of these things as they age. They're taking their love of an animated medium or storytelling with them. So why are we not serving that more? Especially when you can produce it for a fraction of the price point of a lot of live action stuff.
Absolutely. And so when did the Culture Misfit start to take shape?
I had quietly been consulting for a few boutique studios and individuals starting in the fall of last year, just as a way to still, scratch that itch in between taking a bunch of lunches and meetings and generals and looking for the next full-time thing. And then I told myself, well, I'll give it a year. I'll give myself 1 year to dilly-dally and have fun and just decompress after my exit from my previous full-time job, and hope that I'll find the next full-time thing within a year. And despite a lot of interviews at some really cool places, it didn't happen, because the jobs are so few and far between. And whenever those arise for full-time opportunities, it's like you're fighting a ton of your friends who are also out of work for the same role.
Absolutely.
It's hard.
When I was running a room 2 shows ago, I mean, I'd have showrunners reach out for freelance scripts.
Yes.
And so and then there's new people that are looking to just break in and get their first or second script, and they're up against showrunners. And so you're trying to balance that. And this showrunner hasn't worked full-time in 2 years. And so, as a writer, you could take freelance work just to stay in the mix. But what is there an equivalent for an executive? And it sounds like maybe consulting to a degree.
Consulting is that thing, which is why Culture Misfit kind of came to be, is that, okay, well, you've been doing this without having announced it to the world for a little bit. And there's, if the work is not coming to you, you need to make the work itself and really advertise your specific niche skill set and expertise within this space. So I decided to launch formally with the intent of, essentially freelancing until I find the next full-time thing. And that could come in the form of consulting. It could come in the form of producing for adult animation, basically any way that professionals or aspiring professionals want to collaborate and seek my expertise. That's what I'm here to offer.
When you announced it recently and I went on your website, I love the presentation. It
Oh,
just
thank
looks
you.
so good. It looks so awesome. And so why Culture Misfit?
I think for me, it just embodies who I am in so many ways and the type of work that I do in so many ways. If you look at adult animation, if you look at anime, if you look at the gaming space, despite all of that being kind of a dominant form of pop culture, it's still never fully regarded as like something to be taken seriously.
It's still on the outside a little bit,
It's
right?
still very much on the outside. And whenever I see some article from a business trade that's somehow trying to unlock the mystery of why anime is successful, it's like, guys, it has been successful for years. Like, why does this keep surprising us that anime is a dominant form of pop culture, entertainment, and storytelling? It's very much akin to horror in that way, where whenever there's a horror box office that surprises people, the industry for some reason is like, oh yeah, like horror, maybe there's something there. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Horror has been there because there's been a community for it. There's a community for that. There's a community for anime. They love to amplify the things that they love and really evangelize it. And that's how stuff takes off. So why are the business trades in our industry constantly mystified by the success of these things? And I think it's because the normies out there in charge still don't fully understand these little subcultures that are actually not subcultures. They're dominant pop culture.
Yeah, they're always the exceptions to the rule, right? Anytime
Yeah.
one of them breaks out into the mainstream,
Yeah.
right? But it's like, no, they've been there. When you were going back a second, interviewing at these different companies that you were talking about, did you feel like your experience, very specific experience, was working against you in some cases, as you know, your specialty in adult animation, or no? Because
No.
sometimes like a writer can get pigeonholed. Did
No,
you find that?
I think it was working for me. I think that the difference between executives and writers in that space, and I learned this from a great executive who at the time I believe was an EVP at Paramount. He said, always have a brand. You need to always be the go-to person for this. Because if you're a jack of all trades who can do anything, you're just going to be competing with all of the other jacks of all trades in the business. You need to have a thing. You need to have a passion, whether that's genre storytelling, whether that's science fiction, whether that's hard comedies, what have you. If you can become the go-to talent magnet for that space, that's critical. So for me, I just leaned into that thinking, and it was easy for me to do because I love this space. And that's been nothing but advantageous for me in terms of branding myself.
Yeah, that's great advice that he gave you. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
To have a brand instead of being the jack of all trades.
Well, yeah, if I went into the consulting space just as a kids animation consultant, do you know how many of those there are? There are a lot of those. I'd be competing within a really wide pool of very talented industry colleagues. But what I do is so specific that it attracts a specific clientele, and not too many other people out there are doing what I do within adult animation.
Yeah, with the history that you have, what kinds of problems would you say are you helping people solve with Culture Misfit?
I think a lot of it is mostly at the development and pitch phase, really preparing certain clients for what to expect and what buyers expect when somebody comes in with a pitch. Obviously, I've been in the position of being a buyer for over a decade now, so I can understand from a buyer's point of view what I need to see. And then now I can extol that to creatives and tell them, these are the things that you really need to hit if you want anybody to take you seriously once you get in that pitch room. So that's one component that's been helpful. I think the other component that's been helpful is that there are a lot of studios and rights holders who are looking to get into the animation space but don't necessarily have the practical know-how or expertise to do so. So it's been a lot of helping those types of entities understand what it means to develop for animation, who the talent pool is, what the production pipeline is. So that's kind of the
Yeah.
two-pronged ways that I feel that I'm helping people right now.
So then a two-part question: who are you targeting, and what can a client bring you? Is it an original pitch that they're working on that they want to get out there? Is it IP that they have but they don't know where they should be taking it?
It's both. It's absolutely both. I think for me, I love working with individual creators because they have so much passion. They're not disillusioned by the industry in a way that a lot of peers in the business who have been at this for decades now are. So I love the effervescence of people who still want to make the thing and sell their idea and develop their idea in a market that's very difficult to navigate right now. That kind of passion and almost positive naivety is actually really infectious and like helps me when I'm feeling a little down about the state of the business. So working with individual creators on cultivating their ideas and giving them feedback is definitely wonderful. And yes, the other component is absolutely working with those rights holders and boutique studios who are either looking for an animated expression of their IP or looking to take their original idea to the next level and make it market ready. That's kind of the pool that primarily I'm focusing on at this point in time.
Yeah. And what do you wish more writers or show creators understood about selling their project?
Here's a hot take. I'm going to say this in a very harsh way. Your world building is not as special as you think it is. Because world building is not what sells a show. What sells a show is a great story, a great character journey, great relationships between those characters, and a theme that ties it all together. If you lead your pitch with, look at how unique and cool my world is, and look at how the magic system is so different from anybody else's, that's all just window dressing. That's not actually the core or the crux of your idea. That's not what matters in the long run. So try not to focus as much on world building. Don't lead with that.
I think that's fantastic advice. And it is characters that you fall in love with.
Yeah.
And then experience the world of that show through the characters and through their journey.
Yes.
But it's characters first. And those are always the toughest descriptions to write or, archetypes to lock in. And,
Yeah.
And you mentioned relationships between the characters. So that dynamic. And why is that important?
Yeah. And well, I think the relationships between the characters are the ways in which you, as an audience member, find yourself relating to those characters, getting invested in their journeys, but also relationship-driven storytelling really propels a narrative series forward over multiple episodes in a way that creates an engine outside of the plot itself. So that to me is really important, especially when it comes to animation. Again, people are looking to befriend these characters. They're looking to identify themselves with them. So you need to make sure that the relationships that your protagonist has with the other characters in their journey is really solid, is really compelling, really ebbs and flows in unexpected directions over the course of a series or a season of TV in a way where everything hinges on the moves in those relationships and less so on the plot.
Right? Relationships sustain,
Yes.
right? Especially over seasons.
Correct.
And how they change and evolve. And now to flip it, what do you wish more executives understood about working with writers or creators?
Oh, that's a really great question. That these projects are really their babies, that they care deeply about them, and that trivializing any of that work can be really detrimental to not only the relationship that you have with talent as an executive, but also the health of the project in general. I think that sometimes when you have multiple projects on a slate and when you're just cranking and working on so many different shows at once, you can kind of forget the human element of what we do and the art that we make, and the fact that anything that makes it onto a viewer's screen is the culmination of somebody's care and vision and emotion that they've put into a story that they're telling. And that needs to be respected as art and viewed as less of a commodity, to be just moved around on a spreadsheet.
It's easy to see deadlines and numbers
Yes.
on a spreadsheet and forget that there's labor behind every single number.
Well, and it's emotional labor too. It's not just
Emotional
It's
labor.
emotional labor. Yep.
I haven't heard that phrase before, but that's a really good phrase.
Yeah.
Emotional labor. What can you elaborate on that a little more?
I think emotional labor is the work that is done outside of obviously just the physical time that you dedicate to a creative endeavor. It's how much you tax yourself or the endeavor taxes you or your collaborators possibly tax you emotionally in the course of making a project. For instance, if you are creating something or working on a project and you have collaborators who maybe are breathing down your neck or being very stressed about the state of something, and you have to navigate that element in addition to just writing the dang thing or making the damn thing or boarding the damn thing, that's emotional labor, Personality management is emotional labor. So it's the invisible stuff that goes behind the making of a show that oftentimes distracts us from making the art itself.
Yeah, I love that. I love that phrase, emotional labor. I think that's so valid and really applies to what we do, especially creative, because you do give a lot of yourself to it, a lot of your time. It comes from a place of loving it.
Yeah.
You hope other people love it, and it's a hard to know when you're finished. You have to actively separate yourself or turn yourself off.
For instance, you're a writer, so you've obviously gotten a lot of notes from executives on your scripts, I imagine, and on your work. So there's the act of just addressing the notes themselves, which is kind of like physical, mental labor in some ways. But there's also the stress that you can incur from being like, oh my God, am I going to please this executive? Does this executive like me? Do they hate my idea? Are they playing mind games with me? F this guy, whatever. That is the emotional labor that can sometimes manifest into stress that also is a part of that process.
Absolutely true. You look for the compliments anywhere you can find them.
Exactly.
You just they usually put an exclamation point when they say, thanks for sending this, but
Correct.
this time they didn't.
They must hate it. They must hate it.
Right.
Then.
There's a lot that you bring to it. That's, that is very valid. This is something I ask every guest. Mm-hmm. It's called the rule I break.
Okay.
Every industry has rules. Some are there for a reason, and some are just begging to be broken. So what's a rule in your field that you don't follow or believe in?
Oh my God. That's a spicy question. There are a lot of them. I tend to be a rule breaker in some ways. I think for me, as an executive, there's a lot of pressure to be very buttoned up and, corporate and very professional. But the rule I break is you also need to be vulnerable, and you need to learn how to be vulnerable, not just with your colleagues internally, but also with the talent that you work with as well. Because that's where human connection derives from, and human connection can manifest itself in the art and in the work in really cool ways if you allow that to happen.
And what does that look like, being vulnerable?
I think, it's not only admitting when you need help at a workplace, but it's also when you're working, say, with a showrunner on a series and some idea really resonates with you and you want to, explain to them why this means something so personally and we should lean into this in some way because an audience member might also be able to relate. I think that those types of moments are really important. They're great for building trust with talent and for talent to feel empowered to share that back and just create this kind of bubble of, sincerity, vulnerability, emotion that can bake itself into a show in some way.
Yeah, being vulnerable, because that doesn't come naturally.
Yeah, I mean,
in the workplace.
I think there are a lot of executives who want to isolate themselves in an ivory tower and be better than thou and come down from on high and slap their notes on the table and then jet out and depart. But I do think that really trying to understand one another as humans and inviting in that reciprocal vulnerability is super important to the creative process. You know, I like to think we work in art first and commerce second. I hope that it stays that way, but that's very critical to art, in my opinion.
How has your definition of success changed now versus when you were starting out?
It's changed pretty drastically, I would say. When I first started in the business and when I was in my 20s, there was a lot of pressure if you were an assistant to make creative executive by the time that you were 30. I made creative executive at 25. So I was like, man, I'm hot shit. Look at me. I want to climb that corporate ladder as high as I can, baby. I was like, let's go CE, let's go director of development, VP, SVP, EVP, you know, all the way to president of production. And years into my career, I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't need to climb that ladder. I think that there's a rung on the ladder where I'm totally content to be. And it has to be somewhere in the trenches where you can still be creative. I think that if you climb the corporate ladder too high, especially within entertainment, your job mostly becomes just managing upward and not actually managing the day-to-day projects and art that you're working on. I never want to get out of the trenches of actually getting my hands dirty on a show. So if I need to stay in those trenches, I will happily live there in the slop. But I don't feel the need anymore to one day make president of production at some place because that's not the job that I want to do.
Yeah, you're getting away from what you love at that point.
Yeah.
You're kind of, you know, seeing it from a distance as opposed to just getting in and shaping it.
Yeah.
Right?
Why would I ever want to manage the expectations of a CEO? That job sounds like it would suck.
Right? And that seems like a full-time job, you know, 5 times
Talk
over.
about emotional labor.
Yeah.
Like, I'd like to avoid that.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we go, I like to do a rapid fire round.
Okay.
So 5 questions. You can say as much or as little, and whatever comes to mind.
Okay.
What was the last book that you read?
Fourth Wing.
Fourth Wing?
Yes.
What was that?
It's a fantasy novel. It's very, very popular. You need to check it out. It's a good series by Rebecca Yarros. So I finally read the first book within that series. It took me a while.
What's a movie you love rewatching?
Oh, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. All extended editions all the way through in chronological order.
If it wasn't this, what's another career field you could see yourself in?
It's hard to see myself doing anything else, but I don't know. I could always go back to that Celtics journalist journey. I could knock on the door of that person in college and, you know, get the obituary of their loved one, and I could have done that, but maybe in another lifetime.
Worst piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh man. That's a spicy question too. I think the worst piece of advice I've ever received was from another executive, and it was to care less. And I think for me, as somebody who happens to have a career that's very aligned with my personal passions, who's fought really, really hard and scrappily to make it where I am today, why wouldn't I want to care more about what I do? I think that when you show a lot of care about a show that you're working on or a movie that you're working on, it really invigorates the people around you, whether those are internal partners or whether that's external talent, and it motivates them to care too. And when you care, there are a lot of great emotions, good or bad, that come from caring about something that you can bake into the work itself. And I think that shows up on the screen ultimately in a positive way. I feel like if you care less about what you're doing and are detached from your work, that it's not a career, it's just a job. And that detachment ultimately can demotivate a team and can show up in the work in a way where viewers pick up on it as well. So yeah, never care less, care just as much or more.
Best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh, that's a good one too. Best piece of advice I've ever received was probably from one of my bosses at New Regency, and it was to pick up the damn phone. And what that meant was, at the time, I had just recently been promoted to coordinator, And one of my bosses at the time, Andrew Kaloff, shout out to Kaloff, he asked me to go chase down some fancy spec script that was floating around from a high-level agent at WME. And I was just a baby, recently promoted off the desk. And I was like, I'm terrified to call this agent. They have no idea who I am. I'm going to pick up the phone, introduce myself. They're going to be like, who the F are you? And slam the phone down. And I was just catastrophizing all of these things. And he just said, pick up the damn phone. You can do this. You're an entertainment coordinator. You're going to be an executive one day. You can do this. So I picked up the damn phone and I cold called this agent, and they were not scary at all. And they were very happy to help, and nothing was abnormal about it. And I just thought, oh, wow, I can do this. I don't need to doom and gloom about the potential, results or rejections or anything. So whenever now I need to motivate myself to do something I'm afraid to do, I just think in my head, pick up the damn phone. You can do this.
I think that's advice we could all use. Pick up the damn phone. What is next for you, and where can people find you or your work?
Yeah, I mean, the next thing for me is honestly just continuing to build my client base with Culture Misfit. They can find me at my website, culturemisfit.com, or on LinkedIn. And I just look forward to continuing to pioneer this world of adult animation and IP adaptations. And I hope as many people, both viewers and talent, get excited about this space as possible, because I just think it's going to continue to grow.
It's been such a delight listening to you, and you're such a champion for the genre and what you do and what you love, but you're also so articulate about it. And so I just think that people can take so much of this away, and just fascinating to hear your side of it. And so just thank you for coming on and sharing your story, Marisa.
Of course. Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate you having me.